Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a bit of a silly tier 5 replay. One of the main reasons why it's going to be silly is because it's the Krasny Krym, which has a bit of a reputation for not being a terribly good tier 5 cruiser, but actually it kind of is, with the proviso that you have a very good captain in it. Now this is essentially an up-tiered Svetlana, and a slightly modernised Svetlana, but in terms of its firepower it's pretty much the same ship. However, because it's the same firepower, the same 130mm guns, that means that you get to use AFT and have that benefit the main battery. And that means that you can have the best range of any of the tier 5 cruisers. Well, excluding the use of spotter planes, of course, but even so, 16.8 is pretty damn good, and that even beats some tier 6 and 7 cruisers for range. They are not, however, particularly fast shells, and they have got rather high arcs, although in this case that's going to help me out, because this Gneisenau is just lurking behind an island, and it's a low enough island that I can easily just pepper away at them and hopefully set some fires, because you really do just rely more on the weight of fire and setting fires rather than the actual shell damage done, even with IFHE, which does help, but it doesn't help as much as if this was a 6-inch gunned ship. But if this was a 6-inch gunned ship, I would not have the range. Although actually that Gneisenau is close enough that I could hit that with, you know, an Omaha or Murmansk at this point. Now this is technically a bottom tier game, but it's actually quite good matchmaking for being tier 7. The majority of ships are tier 5 and tier 6, with only a smattering of tier 7s. And that Gneisenau especially, that's the biggest, nastiest enemy ship. If we can take care of that, and they're about to eat a bunch of torpedoes from our Mutsuki, making a very bold play, which is actually paying off very nicely, then that helps me out, because there is a feature of the Svetlana and the Krasny Krym which is quite useful for the tier. It has sufficiently strong belt armour to resist up to 14-inch guns when you're bow on. Now that comes with a massive caveat in that it's only the waterline and the upper belt that will resist 14-inch guns. The upper part of the bow armour is something like 10 or 13mm, and it will go through that easily. But the actual belt armour, well, at the waterline it's something like 75mm, which is a bit nuts for a cruiser, at this tier especially. And then the upper part is, I want to say 30-something? It's enough to resist being overmatched by 14-inch guns anyway. And that's going to become important later on in this replay, because the only enemy battleships left are all ones with 14-inch guns. There is, interestingly, one other cruiser out this tier that gets this feature, and it's maybe not one you would think of as having good armour, because it's the Emerald, which has a 38mm belt, which, just like this and the Svetlana, extends all around the front of the ship. But just like this, it has a very squashy upper bow, and so when you're talking about resisting 14-inch shells, it really is only the ones that hit in exactly the right place. If people are aiming just a bit higher, or RNG lands them just a bit higher, then they are going to shred you. So initially in this game I started off going south. Partly that was to stay with the herd, partly that was to maybe try and tackle some of the enemy destroyers that had been spotted going that way. But as it was, I decided after a minute or two that it would actually be better to turn around and support my division mate, who was here in the October Revolution, and maybe try and slow down any advancing enemies who are coming around the north side of the map. And there are some, and we have lost one ship to them already in the form of an Eitel Friedrich who pushed way too far around, but it doesn't really look like a particularly concerted push. These enemy ships are coming forwards in dribs and drabs. And the Fuso especially, one of the remaining enemy battleships, well, we know they are on this flank, but it's going to turn out to be one of those Fuso players that has decided that because they have a 21-kilometer range, then therefore they must only fire from that 21-kilometer range. Now, Fu's getting a bit beaten up at this point, as is this New Orleans that's also close by, so I am relatively unmolested at the moment, and I will be for most of this game, to be fair. This is going to be one of those matches where, for a lot of it, if I'd been in most of the other Tier 5 cruisers, I probably would have done just as well. But that armour will become important later on. But it's not like I get a completely scot-free ride. There are times when people do try and shoot at me, and get a little bit lucky with salvos like that. But at this tier, with the 14-inch gunned battleships, they can throw a lot of lead in your direction, as it were, but they tend to be rather scattershot. And so sometimes it can be really nasty, sometimes you can get deleted from full health by a single New Mex or Arizona or Fuso salvo, but other times everything splashes around you completely harmlessly. I'm definitely being helped out personally by the fact that they're all focusing Fu at the moment. It's not so good for him, but he at least is in a ship that can better withstand such rough treatment. And it probably doesn't hurt that he's in the a Soviet battleship as well, because it of course has that unique damage control party where you have a limited number of them, but they have a very rapid cooldown, which is actually going to be a feature of all of the upcoming Soviet battleships as well. And it really does completely change how you use your damage control party. You can, of course, just, you know, spam it quickly to put out every fire, but you will run out very quickly, so you still have to be careful when and where you actually use them. But there are times when you can much more afford to put out a pesky fire, or put out multiple fires in quick succession if the situation seems to call for it. So we're falling back slowly at this point, but it's a bit of a desultory enemy advance. It's basically just that Marblehead and this Arizona. We do have a Genizer now that's, I think, occupying some of the enemy team's attention in the middle, and the team that went round the south is now at the enemy cap, so maybe some ships are turning around to deal with that as well. So this enemy team wasn't the best. It wasn't the most challenging enemy team. I mean, they have equally reached our cap, but we're in a relatively good position to defend. I mean, Fu is still alive. He's gotten a bit beaten up, but he is very much still alive. I am in a pretty decent ship to deal with that destroyer. And the Marblehead, well, the Marblehead is pretty damn beat up themselves at the moment, so they're not going to take much to kill at this stage. And in fact, I'm trying a sneaky salvo here, although this is unlikely to be enough damage to... yeah, there we go. I'm only just going to clip the back of the ship. It doesn't really do a lot of damage. They're not very fast shells in this ship at all. It really is like playing... the Omaha or something of that nature. I think they're probably a bit faster, but it's still not. It's not like playing the Kirov, for example. So there's that sneaky little destroyer, and if I take one of these torps, it would be pretty damn bad. But I do have hydro available, so I immediately pop that. And all in all, I think this is a fairly comfortable situation for this ship, because you've got a really nice spread of guns. Literally a spread of guns. You've got guns all around the ship, so angling from side to side doesn't lose you firepower. And the relatively rapid rate of fire, combined with just the sheer number of guns, meant that, yeah, that was a fairly easy one to try and finish off. Although I didn't actually get the kill, it was our Matsuki that... got the killing blow. The enemy Matsuki very nicely dropped a smokescreen for me, so I've now got a little window where I can just fire at this Arizona with impunity, and so I've killed my speed a bit just to slow the rate at which we are advancing towards each other. This isn't going to last forever, of course, and hopefully by the time they can see me, they'll be wounded enough to finish off relatively easily. But we'll see. I mean, they're still sitting on, what, 40% of their health? If they eat some of these torpedoes, that would help. If Fu or the Gneisenau, who's now coming back to help out, manage to land some hits, that would also be very, very useful. But as it is, yeah, I'm close enough now that they're taking an interest. Maybe they know I have torpedoes, or maybe it's just, oh hey, it's a squashy cruiser advancing on me. I can easily do some damage to that before I die. Here's where that belt armor comes in useful. Yep, no damage whatsoever. It just plonked onto that either the upper belt or the waterline belt and did absolutely nothing. HE would have done more to me there. So yeah, there's just a little peculiarity of this ship that came in incredibly useful in this particular game. We have basically won at this stage. I mean, this wasn't a particularly great enemy team. It certainly didn't help them that Fuso spent the entire time in this game going pretty much around the outside of the map, and at the stage where they're now approaching where their allies have all been dying, well, all their allies have died, and it's just them. And at this stage, I thought, well, I could just sit behind the island, play it safe, but that's not going to get me some extra damage. And even if I do die, we've still won this, so I decided to just go for it. And there's that shotgun dispersion helping me out. I didn't even have to bounce anything that time. That was me just being able to dodge every single shell. Because it's not like this is a particularly fat ship either. I mean, a lot of cruisers of this tier are fairly skinny, for want of a better word, which certainly helps when you're trying to dodge. But yep, there's that belt armor. Like an Omaha or a Kirov or something like that at this stage of things, any hit to the bow would basically pen. But because I've got that belt armor, I am taking so little damage. Now there is a slightly hairy moment where one of his secondary guns knocks out the torp launcher on this side, but having dodged my first lot of torps, whether intentionally or not, I left the second lot till much closer, and so was able to get the kill and a last bit of damage, and that took me just over 100,000 damage done. All whilst technically bottom tier. I've certainly had worse games in the Krasny Krym, but this was a really interesting one in that, well, yeah, the enemy team wasn't very good, but it demonstrated, probably better than any other game I've had in this, how effective that belt armor can be. And it was certainly useful that the Gneisenau got knocked out early, because the 15-inch guns, of course, could overmatch. I don't think they'd be able to overmatch, well, no, they wouldn't be able to overmatch the 75mm waterline, but they would be able to overmatch the upper belt. Of course, then with the Gneisenau, you've still got a fairly good chance of not taking huge amounts of damage just because it only has 6 barrels and German dispersion, but it was still a useful ship to take out early. So all in all, that was a pretty good game. Our team played pretty well, and considering that I wasn't exactly shying away from the fight, it was a little bit ridiculous that I ended up ending that game with as much health remaining as I did. And I actually had a decent amount of potential damage in that one, and I think, does it even count damage you've bounced off your armor for potential damage? I don't know, but it was a clean 500,000, in fact just over 500,000 potential damage, and you'd be struggling to sustain that and come out with that much hit points in an Omaha or a Kirov. You really would. Anyway, so that's it for this replay. Hopefully you have enjoyed it, and if you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.